Hello and welcome. Today, I'm going to go over how you as a product manager can help improve the engineering process. This is really all about how you can help your cross-functional team work together to build successful, high-quality products. My name is Cathy, and I've been a product manager for 8 years now. I started my career at Microsoft in Seattle right out of college. After having the opportunity to work on a pretty diverse set of projects ranging from the first version of the Excel mobile app to fixing save reliability on Word, I went to Facebook for a while where I learned a ton about their product building philosophy. And then I found myself back at Microsoft in February of this year. Over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of different types of products. So everything from mobile to web, completely new V1 to like really heavy client products. I've worked with really different types of teams. So everything from a dedicated, small, young, cross-functional team to a really, really large matrixed organization. And in a lot of different environments. So I've worked, in person, in open space. I worked in closed offices. And now we're all experiencing remote work right now. Something that I've become really passionate about throughout all of these circumstances is figuring out how to get any engineering team to work together to have the most impact that they can, and also just enjoy the time that they have working together. I now spend my time working on Microsoft Planner and Project, which help teams manage their work. So I also spend a lot of my product building time thinking about how teams can work together to accomplish their goals. Today, we're going to start by talking about why engineering process is important at all. And then we'll move on to 6 steps that PMs can use to improve the engineering process, which is going to go over how you can help your team identify a productive problem to solve, how you can actually get that problem solved, and how you can make sure your solution is effective and sticky. All right, now starting with why process is important for PMs. All right, now as a product manager, your ultimate responsibility is the success of your product. A huge portion of your time, like most of it, is going to be spent figuring out what your team should be building. You're going to listen to your customers and deeply understand their dreams and challenges and come up with a compelling vision that your product is going to bring to their world. You're going to look at your positioning in the market and you're going to define an amazing strategy to get you to your vision. And then you define the actual specific things that your team can go build and you put those on a roadmap, right? So this is the majority of what you do. However, if your team cannot execute, it doesn't matter how good your strategy and vision is, you're not going to go anywhere. Now, over the last decade or two, process has grown to be kind of a dirty word in Silicon Valley. Engineers and designers want to move really fast. Everyone wants to have a huge impact. And people want to have autonomy and intellectual freedom in the way that they work. And a lot of this makes sense. I'm pretty sure that most of the people that you're working with are just like extremely smart, extremely driven, and they don't want to spend their time doing dumb, pointless, busy work. I have a meme here from Office Space, which is one of my all-time favorites, that satirizes work life at a typical late 1990s Silicon Valley software company, where the manager is always asking the employee to do ridiculous things to their company's status report. So while people might not want to do silly things with process, issues in process or how we work together to build things can result in catastrophe. For example, on January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds into its flight, killing all 7 crew members aboard. The Rogers Commission found that NASA's organizational culture and decision-making processes had been the contributing factors to the accident. The agency actually violated its own safety rules. NASA managers had known about a potentially catastrophic flaw in the ship's O-rings for almost a decade, but they failed to address the problem properly. NASA managers also completely disregarded warnings from engineers about the dangers of launching posed by low temperatures the morning of launch, and they failed to adequately report these technical concerns to their superiors. Unfortunately, the Challenger is far from an anomaly. I'm sure you can all come up with other great examples from history, like Chernobyl, which unfortunately was a real thing and not just a great HBO series, or the collapse of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Software has these problems too. In 2010, healthcare.gov crashed only 2 hours after its initial launch due to too much server traffic that they just weren't prepared for. And in 2018, a false emergency message about an impending missile strike was sent across the entire state of Hawaii, which drove people into absolute panic. Now, not every bad process situation is going to result in like a Challenger level explosion. However, bad process and bad communication can prevent you from even getting your product out the door. It can make team dynamics absolutely miserable. How many of you have been in a situation before where you've just had like a persistently angry stakeholder? What about an engineering team that seemed to be in a nonstop war room and always underwater? Or what about a product that just seems to have rampant quality issues that you can never really get under control? You need to be able to figure out when things aren't going well and then how to get your team to work together in order to fix them. All right, so the first thing that you're going to do is identify that something is wrong in the first place. As a PM, you're at the forefront of problems on your team. You have exposure to every single discipline on your cross-functional team, and fortunately or unfortunately, you sit in a lot of meetings. You're in the ideal place to identify when something just isn't going so well. There's also a few tools that I found really, really useful in keeping up with team dynamics over the years. The first is simple, and it's just to really make sure that you're socializing and building strong relationships on your team. This doesn't have to mean going out and partying, and it's not something that's over in times of COVID. It's just about being like a decent human and taking the extra time to hear from people on your team. Try to take a few minutes to attend team events, listen to people who are there, share personal things about your life, and spend the first 3 to 5 minutes of your Zoom meetings or Teams meetings just asking what's on someone's mind. The second thing that really helps me is having regular one-on-ones with stakeholders across every discipline on the team. These definitely don't have to be every week like you would with a direct manager or a direct report. You could even consider something like 15 minutes every 2 weeks or half an hour every month or 2. The point is to just give yourself space to discuss sensitive issues and make sure it's a really safe space. Even if you have nothing to talk about, I would even consider keeping a lot of these on your calendar. And that way you can work on building relationships over time so that when you do have something tough to talk about, the practice is there and the space is there. If you don't have something to fill up a full half hour, you can always end early. The last great tool that I love to stay on top of what's going on a team are retrospectives. I've been on a few awesome engineering teams that do these every single month, and I think it's a really nice way to help surface issues or challenges going on the team, especially for people who may be a little bit more introverted. It's a really cool space because it gives them a place that's appropriate to bring up issues, and it allows them to write things down if they're uncomfortable bringing them up speaking first. If you're in person, these are super easy. You can just get everyone together in a conference room, use a whiteboard and post-it notes, and break it up into things that you want to continue doing, things that you want to stop doing, and things that you think are going really well. There's also some specific tools that are built for this and that I think work really, really great when you're working remotely. So something like Retro is a purpose-built tool, but then there's also templates available in a ton of task management tools. I've used one in Azure DevOps. You could just use a planner board or a Trello board. There's lots of easy ways to do it. All right. Now, once you've identified something is wrong, you still have a bunch of work to do in defining the actual problem. And you want to be really, really careful about how you define the problem. It's important to define something that is both solvable and that leads to a better world when it is actually solved. Now, let's walk through an example, and I think that'll help clarify this a little bit. Let's say that your team has been working overtime and doing everything that they can. They've been doing great work. But one of your stakeholders is profusely angry at you for not getting their features done. And your team has been doing a ton of work that's on higher priority stuff, but the stakeholder is just always mad at you. Now, there's a few ways we could find the problem. The first one is saying the stakeholder is an unreasonable bunny rabbit who is too stupid to understand us very smart engineers. Okay, well, this is kind of a clear way to define the problem, actually. If this is truly the way that you want to define it, there's action that can be taken, right? You could have this stakeholder reassigned to another area, potentially, if it gets escalated. The stakeholder could be out of a job. However, the way you're phrasing the problem here doesn't really lead to a better world that you want to live in. This sounds like a toxic work environment. So we could try another way. We could say the stakeholder doesn't feel heard. That's a lot nicer than option A. The problem with this one, though, is that I don't really know how to solve it. Do I just listen to the stakeholder more? That sounds like it's time consuming, and I'm not sure what output would really change. Would we do something different from the stakeholder? I don't think they'd be happy in the long term if we just listened to them. So we need something that provides more clarity than that. What about this last one? The stakeholder doesn't have transparency into where their ask falls among all of the critical priorities the engineering team is juggling. So this one's kind of nice because all of a sudden your wheels start turning and you're like, oh, I can fix that. What if we just came up with a process where we could show our stakeholder what's on our roadmap and why everything is really important? And we can show them the business goals that our team is shooting for and why the work that we're doing accrues to those goals more. And that sounds like it's really doable from an engineering standpoint. And then from your stakeholder standpoint, they could see that. Then all of a sudden they might know, oh crap, this engineering team isn't going to be able to take on my work. They're too busy. I need to find another way to get my problem solved. Or they might say, oh wow, I didn't realize they were doing all that important work, and my thing really needs to get solved, and they're the only ones that can do it, and I have leverage to get them more resources. Let me talk to that person that can help them get more resources, and then they'll have more bandwidth to solve my problem too. Or maybe then the stakeholder just hears, hey, I didn't realize you guys were working on so much more important stuff. I agree this is important. Now I have the collateral I need to go back to my manager and say, you guys are really booked up on important business critical projects. And ours isn't going to get done, and it's a hard call, but that's the way it is. This puts everyone in a better spot and allows everyone to communicate better about outcomes. All right, so once you have your awesome problem that you know is going to lead to a better world when it's solved, you need to go and socialize that problem. And this is similar to like what you would do when you're building any type of product, right? Like we don't just like immediately say, hey, I need 20 engineers to go build a new thing. Like you bounce this idea off a ton of people and you build it up over time. Even more, given that we're talking about a lot of people problems here, probably potentially team dynamic problems, you definitely want to start small and you want to be careful. I like to write down my problem ahead of time and sit on it for 24 hours and reread it and see if I still believe it a lot of the time. And I often like, especially when it's about people problems, like to run it by someone in my inner circle who's like a trusted confidant who is not on my work team. So I'll usually go to someone who is maybe like a PM I'm really close with that I worked with in the past, who isn't on my team now, or even my husband. And I'll just lay out, the symptoms I've been seeing on the team, talk about the problem I'm going to define and why I think it's an impactful thing to go and tackle. And usually that'll help me get some feedback and move things to a point where I feel like it's a good problem to bring to my team. Then I start socializing it in my team. I start in really small conversations like one-on-ones, and I move it into larger and larger forums like team meetings. And the idea here is that once you've built up individual agreement and people have had a chance to reflect on this problem, think about it more, you're going to have a better conversation in a larger forum, and it's just going to be a more positive conversation in a larger forum. Something that you also want to be really, really careful about whenever you're talking about these problems is to make sure that you're really focusing on the problem statement and the impact you think you're going to have on the team and on the product when you solve it. Be really, really careful not to blame anyone and to talk about any symptoms in a really, really non-blaming way. All right, so now your whole team is bought off on the fact that this problem needs to be solved and you got to go solve it. There might be some problems you might want to just go solve on your own, but I think it's better to partner with someone who's on the front lines in most of these situations. I really like to veer away from prescribing specific steps and processes that I'll never be accountable for. I think that really good operations design requires an intimate knowledge of the systems, and you likely just don't have that as a PM. Like, even if you do have background writing code or designing from some other context, you're not in the system that your team is in every single day right now. So make sure you find someone who knows the system really, really well, and also who will be accountable to the changes. You want to make sure that they're designing something that they would use themselves, so that it's reasonable and it makes sense. Hopefully, if you've done a good job of socializing your problem, most of your team is going to think it's important, and smart people like solving important, impactful problems. And all people, hopefully, like working on fun, collaborative teams. The The person that you partner with absolutely doesn't need to be an engineering manager or a lead designer or someone who's in charge. This can actually be a really good growth opportunity for someone who's more junior and passionate about the space or just looking to grow as a leader. The other benefit sometimes of working with someone who's more junior is that they may have a little more bandwidth or just a little bit more creativity to throw at a space if it's something completely new to them. Definitely feel free to give your partner ideas on how you might attack the problem. And definitely give them constructive feedback if you're worried that their process isn't actually solving the problem, or if you worried it could lead to toxic outcomes. But give them the creative space and the ownership to really take charge, and don't feel like you're going to micromanage them, because you really want it to be a partnership. And then you have a process, right? So what's the next step for moving forward? You want to make sure that you can measure whether or not your process is impactful. So like a product, the thing that you care about with process change is not the process itself, it's the outcome. You need to figure out how to measure the effectiveness of your process, and you have to commit to work on iterating and changing it until you've actually reached your goal. Now, in an ideal world, all process changes would map directly to the core global metrics and OKRs that your team is already focused on, like the sales of your product or meeting your service level agreement on time. However, I acknowledge that a lot of times these types of metrics can be lagging, or there can be so many factors that go into them that picking apart whether or not, it was a team culture thing or a process thing that impacted it can be difficult. So you might want to find a leading metric that you can use to measure it as well. Team surveys, in my mind, have worked really, really well, especially if they're just thoughtfully designed and they're not sent too often and they don't have too many questions. So that's something that I would recommend moving forward. One resource that I think really drives home how to think about measuring process improvement is a book called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt. And I think it's a really fun read because it's written like a novel instead of a standard business book. So definitely take a look at that when you get a chance if you haven't already. All right, now the final step that we have is to communicate your change. As a PM, this might be one of the most critical pieces of the entire process. I'm going to pick on Excel for a moment because it's one of my favorite products and the first product that I worked on. Now, as many of you know, Excel has a lot of functionality, and some of it is buried super deeply under, nested menus, like this one that we have behind this no sign right here. So let's say that you have a feature, right? And your feature solves some critical customer problem. Now let's say your feature that solves a really critical customer problem only lives under this type of menu. Now, your customers aren't able to find this feature and they're still having their problem. Do you say your customer's stupid because they can't find that feature? No, you say that it's just not discoverable because it's not in a key place a normal person would look. Now, the same thing comes to process, right? Have you ever been in an experience before where you haven't been able to find a process, or you've accidentally not followed a process and gotten in trouble for it? only to learn that it was only documented at the bottom of like a very long page on a wiki that your team actually deprecated 2 years earlier. It's the same thing, right? Like your process has to be discoverable. It's your job as a PM to make sure that people know what's going on. So like, don't worry about repeating yourself. When you have your process change finalized, you're gonna need to communicate it multiple ways, multiple times. Like you're gonna have to schedule a team meeting, do a demo, send an email, like embed it within the actual process itself. And that's totally okay. Something you want to be really, really careful of is when you are communicating your process change, you want to start with the problem that you're solving, then the impact that the process or the problem that you're solving is going to have on your team when it's actually solved, and then be really, really succinct about the ask that you have for your audience in terms of following this process. Just that, like a presentation that starts with something like, our team wants to take on even more impactful work for you, or our team wants to make sure that we're giving you more reliable project estimates, is going to gain way more of your audience's attention than a presentation that starts with, you need to file a task from my template and then fill out squares in my spreadsheet. The last thing I would say is that make sure you're just designing for your audience when you're thinking about communicating your process and communicating change. One example I can think of from my team right now that I love is the process that one of my fellow PMs designed for designing feature close emails. It's really important that we document feature closes, and especially in email, on our team. Because we have a really large matrix or engineering team, and everyone needs to like stay looped in with what's going on. And it needs to be in a place that can be forwarded outside of our team across to a bunch of different partners. So there's a really cool system designed right now that integrates and it automates with our engineering system, and every single time a task is closed that relates to a feature, it will generate a new task in a plan board that's linked to the Teams channel that everyone is in every single day, so you're bound to see it. And then as soon as you click on that notification, you get a task that clearly tells you why sending feature emails is important. You can click on a link within that task. It brings you to a template that you can copy and paste within like 5 minutes and send out like a great feature close email. So it embeds it right into your workflow. It makes things super easy, and it continues to let you know why this is important. And that's it. So hopefully now this gave you some knowledge and some ideas to help you work with your team to help, overcome challenges that you're hitting in the engineering process and be able to realize a lot of your really cool visions and launch awesome products. I had a lot of fun putting this together, and I'm just excited to be able to share with what I think is a really cool community, and I hope that this helped everyone out.